Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll just give it a minute to let some more folks in from the lobby. Thank you. All right, I think we can get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Patrick Crowley. I'm the Outreach and Education Manager for the CCB. We've got our first peer networking event in a couple months. We took November and December off with a busy holiday season, and we've got a full slate of events scheduled for the first half of 2025 that we're excited about. Those of you that have been around since the very beginning might notice that this topic is a bit of a repeat, but we think it's a worthy repeat, particularly as we start a new year and we get into the typical tax season. So we have welcomed back Will Baker. Will's got an impressive title as Assistant Attorney General and Tax Department Legal Director. So we've asked Will to come back and speak about sort of cannabis issues and taxes. And then, so we'll go through a brief presentation and then really open it up for questions. So if you want to put questions either in the chat, there is also a Q&A section that we'll try to use as things go along. If we don't get to the questions right away, or if we miss them, we'll try to follow up afterwards. And other than that, I just wanted to give a quick shout out for our ongoing rulemaking. So on the CCB website, we have the draft rule amendments for this year. So if you haven't already, please take a look. And there's also materials that will show you how you can be part of the public process and the public comment process. That is all I have for a sort of brief preamble. I will hand it over to Will.
Thanks, Patrick. My name is Will Baker. I am the legal counsel here at the Tax Department. I've been here for quite a while, and I participated in the bills and the laws that laid out the recreational cannabis market in Vermont and the taxes on cannabis that have been implemented. And we oversaw the implementation of the new cannabis excise tax in 2022, and we've been, monitoring and issuing guidance since then. So I have a brief presentation here. Let me know if you cannot see it. And I hope to just go through some of the basics of the tax treatment for recreational retailers, mostly talking about the retailers here. I do have some comments for cultivators and manufacturers as well, and also some agricultural land use points. But most of it is really for the retailers. Please feel free to ask any questions or even get back to us after this presentation today with any questions. All my contact information is at the end of the presentation, and I also have a link to our cannabis tax guide, which is a pretty substantial guide for Vermont taxes on cannabis businesses. And please feel free to reach out to the tax department at any time if you have any questions. Just because you call the tax department with a question does not mean you're going to get audited. We like to provide the best information that we can and get everyone on the same page, particularly with these new taxes. Although these are not so new anymore, they've been in for a couple of years, but still in the grand scheme of things, relatively new. So the first issue I'm going to discuss is the big one, which is the cannabis excise tax, um, which was implemented with the recreational market in 2022. Um, it is very similar to the Vermont sales tax. It's a tax of 14% on the sales
Will,
price of each.
are you sharing anything, Will? Sorry to interrupt.
I am. Can you not see the?
No. Here, why
Okay.
don't I
No, that's all right. I got it. Hold on. Up. How about now?
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
got it now. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Um, so starting with the cannabis excise tax, it's very much like the Vermont sales tax of 14% on the sales price of each retail sale of cannabis. And that includes any product that has cannabis in it, whether it's just dry flower or food or some sort of edible or something else. If it's got cannabis, it's subject to this cannabis excise tax. Again, very much like the sales tax that you're might be familiar with when you go to the store to buy anything else. It's paid by the purchaser to the retailer or the integrated licensee. Must be separately itemized. And this tax is collected by the retailer, held by the retailer, just like sales tax. And then periodically, the retailer is responsible for remitting all that tax to the state of Vermont. Um, and it does not apply to medical patients at a dispensary. It's only for the recreational market. So that's the excise tax. That's the 14%. Now, in addition to that, the sales tax also applies to cannabis at just like any other product that's sold at retail. It's subject to the sales tax. The sales tax is 6%, and so that 14 plus 6 gets you that 20% that retail tax on recreational cannabis. The rate is 6%, and local option tax does apply to cannabis in addition to the excise tax. The local option tax is a tax that some Vermont municipalities have decided to implement in their town. So if you're in a town with a local option tax like Williston, you would collect an additional 1% local option tax. So that's 14% cannabis excise tax, 6% Vermont sales tax, and then the 1% local option tax. The local option tax is a destination-based tax, which means that it matters where the product is sold. If it is sold in a local option tax jurisdiction, it's subject to the 1% local option tax. That includes deliveries. So if I'm in Richmond, but I deliver something into Williston to make that retail sale, I'm delivering in Williston. Williston is a local option tax town, and so I would need to collect the 1% local option tax on that sale, even though my business headquarters is in Richmond. I don't think there's a lot of cannabis delivery right now, so that's not so much of an issue, but if anyone has questions, we can talk about that more. It tends to be a little bit confusing for retailers. No sales tax on the medical patients, just like the cannabis excise tax. So if you're at the medical dispensary, there's no cannabis excise tax, no sales tax, no local option tax. If cannabis is integrated into a food product, it is subject to sales tax, just like the cannabis excise tax. Now, for tax nerds like me, that's odd because generally speaking, food is exempt from the sales tax. If you go to the grocery store and buy groceries, you don't pay sales tax on your groceries. If you go to a restaurant and buy a hamburger, you don't pay sales tax on the hamburger, you pay meals tax. However, the law states that if a product contains cannabis, it is subject to sales tax, no matter what else. Even if it is something ready to eat, like a meal, that would otherwise be subject to meals tax, it's not subject to meals tax. It's only subject to sales tax. So that simplifies the tax treatment for these products a little bit. Whether it's flour, edible, beverage, what have you. It's all, if it has cannabis in it, the tax treatment is the same for sales tax and cannabis excise tax. Okay, so just moving on a little bit to some income tax issues. This is a little bit unusual in at the federal level, as many of you probably know. There are certain exemptions and deductions that a business engaged in cannabis growing or retailing could not take. So at the federal level, the federal tax treatment can be pretty difficult for these businesses operating in this space, because credits and deductions that any other taxpayer and any other business is entitled to is not available to a cannabis business. However, the legislature enacted special tax rules for people in the cannabis business, retailers, cultivators, manufacturers. So if you're engaged in these businesses in Vermont, any credit and deduction that would have been available to you at the federal level is available in Vermont. And the reason why this is important is because the Vermont income taxes are based on the federal income taxes. So if you're an individual and you pay your Vermont income tax, that is based on your adjusted gross income, which is what you calculated on your federal income tax return. So you first calculate the federal, you get that adjusted gross income amount, and then you go and calculate your Vermont tax on the Vermont income tax return and calculate your Vermont tax. But it's all based on that income amount from your federal return. So what we do with these special rules, this applies to the corporate income tax and the personal income tax. And so we allow all those credits and deductions that otherwise are not allowed for cannabis businesses, but are allowed, generally speaking, for any other taxpayer. So we allow them in Vermont. And so what taxpayers need to do is to fill out a federal income tax return that you will not file with the federal government. You will file a federal income tax return. You go ahead and file that under the federal rules, but then you start over again and you prepare a new federal income tax return for Vermont, taking all those credits and deductions that you're eligible to take in Vermont, and then you start the Vermont return. So that lowers your adjusted gross income for individuals or taxable income for corporations. That lowers that taxable amount as you get into the Vermont tax return, and that reduces your Vermont tax. And so we call this a pro forma federal return. And that just means that this is a return that you prepare, a federal return that you prepare. You don't file it with the federal government. You just send it to Vermont, and it allows you to calculate that federal income amount for Vermont purposes. And it's the same, this whole format is the same format that we did for civil unions back in the 1990s, but before the federal government recognized same-sex marriage, Vermonters in a civil union could prepare a married filing joint federal income tax return and send it to Vermont, and that it was called a pro forma return that you'd file with Vermont to get the benefit of being married in Vermont on your Vermont income tax return. So what you need to remember to do when you're preparing your Vermont income tax return, whether you're an individual or whether you're a corporation, is to check the cannabis box on the income tax return so that we know you're a cannabis business and we know to look for that pro forma federal return and that your federal amounts are going to be different than what was filed with the federal government. So here is the Vermont income tax return. It's called the IN 111. And the part that's circled there is the box that you check if you're a cannabis business. And that tells us two important things. One, it tells us that you're a cannabis business and we should expect a pro forma recomputed federal return. And it also helps us a couple of years later when we're in an auditing mode and we get information from the federal government. We get information from the IRS about Vermonters' income. And if that income amount doesn't match the Vermont return, if the federal tax amount doesn't match your Vermont income information, then we might have questions for the taxpayer, and we might send an inquiry to the taxpayer asking them about the discrepancy. Why does this discrepancy exist? Why did you report less income to Vermont than the federal government? But cannabis businesses very legitimately report less income to Vermont than they do federally because they're entitled to more deductions and exemptions. So by checking this box, you're telling us, hey, I'm a cannabis business. My Vermont numbers are not going to match my federal numbers. And so we're not going to get after you in an inquiry a couple of years later if we're reviewing your tax return. So it's really helpful to us if you check that box so we can get it right. And it minimizes your tax liability to the state of Vermont. So those were just a couple points about the income tax treatment for individuals and corporations engaged in a cannabis business in Vermont. I have a couple more points about agricultural and other tax treatment that might be available to you. This is something that is going to reduce your property taxes and maybe reduce your sales tax. So these are benefits to business owners. One is the current use program. The current use program is a program in Vermont where if you have land that is actively used for an agricultural purpose, you pay tax at a lower rate than if you were not engaged in the agricultural activity. It's called the current use program because it looks at the current use of the land. And so if you are engaged in an agricultural business and you're growing crops, just like any other crops, as long as they're grown outside, you are most likely eligible for the current use program. And that can reduce your property tax bill that you receive from your municipality. It is a little bit limited compared to any other agricultural land. The cultivation must be outdoors, and that is just in the law. It was written into the law that way, that the cannabis rules for the current use program are a little bit different than other agricultural businesses. So that is something to keep in mind if you are a cultivator. So some other helpful information that could lower your tax liability are some sales tax exemptions that are available to businesses. Whether you're a cultivator, processor, you might be a manufacturer of cannabis products, there are some sales tax exemptions that are available to you. And I just want to clarify and avoid confusion here. On this slide, when I'm talking about sales tax, I'm not talking about sales tax that's collected when the end consumer purchases cannabis. That tax is always due when a individual purchases recreational cannabis at retail. What I'm talking about here is your obligation to pay sales tax on things you buy to operate your business. So there are some sales tax exemptions available for business inputs, and they are available to cannabis businesses. There are some agricultural exemptions. So if cultivation is outdoors, then agricultural machinery and equipment are exempt from sales tax. There are also some exemptions for agricultural supplies like fertilizer and those sorts of things. So if you purchase those things, keep in mind that you are permitted to purchase those things free from sales tax. And I'll talk about a little bit about the mechanism for how that works in a minute. Another exemption that is available from the sales tax is for manufacturers, and this is a big one. Manufacturers spend a lot of money on supplies, manufacturing machinery, equipment, your raw materials that go in the beginning and then come out as a brand new product in the end. Monitoring devices for your, your series of manufacturing steps, quality control, your packaging, both that initial packaging where the product is placed into the little containers, and then also when those containers are placed into larger boxes or pallets or anything like that. Both initial packaging and secondary packaging is also exempt from sales tax, and also energy. If you use electricity or propane in the manufacturing process, that is also exempt from sales tax during the manufacturing process. And this is just like any other business. There are no specific rules here as far as cannabis. Manufacturing is manufacturing. And if you're otherwise qualified for the manufacturing exemption, because you're manufacturing in the state, you can enjoy these sales tax exemptions. And they're big ones because machinery, equipment, raw materials, those are huge, huge costs for any manufacturing business. So to pay an additional 6% on that unnecessarily is, it's a lot. And these tax exemptions are very beneficial to Vermont businesses. So you might look at your invoices to see if you've paid any sales tax on these things. And if you have, you can apply to the tax department for a refund of the sales tax. So if you've already paid sales tax on this stuff, don't worry. As long as you're within 3 years of when you paid the sales tax, you can come directly to the tax department and ask for a refund, both for the agricultural exemption and the manufacturing exemption. It's a very simple form you fill out, and if you're eligible, you'll receive the tax back that you paid. So if you are, someone presents you with an invoice with sales tax on it and you don't think sales tax is due, you can bring it up with your vendor and say, hey, look, I think I'm exempt from sales tax for this reason. And the vendor might take it off your invoice. If they refuse to do that, you can still get a refund of that sales tax directly from the Vermont Tax Department, as long as you're within 3 years of when you made that purchase. So something to keep in mind as you're looking over your invoices and costs for your business inputs. These exemptions are available to cannabis businesses, just like any other business. There are some other sales tax exemptions as well. We have a lot of information on our website about these 2 sales tax exemptions and others. I think there's 57 sales tax exemptions now. So there are a lot of exemptions. These are the big ones for these types of businesses, but they can save Vermont businesses a lot of money. As I mentioned before, we have a very extensive cannabis tax guide, which goes through everything that I've just talked about and more, including the taxes at the time of retail, the income tax treatment for cannabis businesses, sales tax exemptions, current use treatment, and other topics as well. So we encourage you to check out that guide for more information. And you don't need to remember that link there. Just Google Vermont Cannabis Tax Guide, and it'll pop right up. It's on our website. You can also send any questions you have to me, and my email address is right there, and I will either answer them or get them to our business tax division that answers a lot of questions for Vermont businesses. So Patrick, that's the presentation I've prepared, and I'm more than willing to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Will. That was great information. While we're just queuing up the questions, just a reminder, those that are on the phone can unmute themselves by pressing *6. And other than that, we will use the raise hand function if you had a question. So while we're just getting the hands raised for any questions, I'll read off a couple questions from the chat and the Q&A. First one we got from Sue was, I don't know, this probably gets back to the creation of the law, but her question is, why are we not just applying the 14% excise tax to milligrams per product as opposed to the full product price? So I guess that would be considering sort of potency in assessing the excise tax.
Yeah, that's beyond my job description. That's a policy decision that I suppose was made by the legislature when they imposed the tax. But that is right. The tax is based on the sales price, no matter potency or anything else.
Another question from the chat was from Chris. It said, what deductions are allowed by Vermont, but not the feds for cultivation businesses?
Yep. I'm not an expert on those, but it is, if you go to a tax preparer like a CPA, they will know all the deductions that are available to businesses. And the point is that under Vermont law, any deductions or exemptions available to any other business is available to those businesses. So, that's more of an accounting question. I know that, depreciation, cost of goods sold, those sorts of things, those are all kind of standard deductions from income that a business might take. Those are all available, just like any other business.
And Lucas here had a pretty similar question. Looks like two people have the same question, which is, you were going over those sales tax exemptions for manufacturing. We've got a lot of cultivators here in the state. So it sounds like cultivators are wondering if they're eligible for similar sales tax exemptions.
Yeah. Well, cultivators would not be manufacturers just by cultivation. They may also be manufacturers because they also manufacture. But if you're just growing, then you wouldn't be a manufacturer under the law, but you would be entitled to the agriculture exemptions under the sales tax law, provided that the cultivation is outdoors. I know a lot of it is not outdoors, but again, the legislature has decided that the agricultural exemptions under the sales tax law, which include supplies, fertilizer, tractors, machinery, equipment, et cetera, Those are available only if you cultivate outdoors.
Okay. Just a reminder, raise hand function if you have any other questions, or you can put them in the chat and I'll read them off. While we're just gathering questions here, we went back and we kind of looked at some of the frequently asked questions, I guess you could say, about tax. I wanted to read off a couple of these because they're interesting. And so one is specifically about retail. If retailers are selling, let's say, T-shirts and stickers at a cannabis retail establishment, what taxes apply to those items?
Yep. So any tangible property sold in the state of Vermont is subject to sales tax unless an exemption applies. So for stickers, that's tangible property sold at retail. And so the sales tax of 6% should be collected on the sales price of the sticker. So you would collect that 6% on the sticker and you can remit it with your sales tax filing at the end of the month. And you can commingle. If you have a sales tax account, you put it in with everything else. Now, T-shirts do have an exemption. Clothing is exempt from the sales tax in Vermont. So there's no sales tax on clothing. So if you're selling a T-shirt, you do not need to collect the sales tax on that T-shirt because it is clothing. But the stickers would be subject to sales tax. Not, of course, cannabis excise tax because there's no cannabis in them.
Great. Well, I'll do a couple more since we've got you here, Will. Thanks again. One of them, anyone that's familiar with the application process knows that part of the process is tax standing. So, you know, your status of standing with the tax department. So one question is, if I am in not good standing with the tax department and they wanted to complete their application, what are their options for sort of reaching out to the tax department and making sure they're in good standing for the application?
Yeah. So to get a business license in Vermont, you do need to be in good standing. That applies to anyone, not just cannabis. You know, if you're opening a restaurant or any other retail establishment and you need a sales tax account to get those, we call them trust tax accounts because the tax is collected in trust for the state of Vermont and then remitted to the state. To get that license, to get your sales tax license or cannabis excise tax license, you do need to be in good standing with your Vermont state taxes. And so that means that you either have filed all the returns that are required to be filed and you have paid all the tax that you're required to pay, or if you do have a tax liability outstanding, that's okay, as long as you're in a payment plan approved by the tax department. And we do those every day, get people on payment plans, get them in good standing, and then they can open up all the tax accounts that they want.
Great. Not seeing any other raised hands or questions. So I guess you covered this a bit at the start, but one of the things I wanted to ask was just the recommended process for getting in touch with the tax department if anyone is, you know, at the point of their state return and they sort of have any burning questions. Where do you advise folks start?
Yeah. So on our website, we have a contact information for our divisions, tax.income@vermont.gov if you have an income tax question, tax.business if you have any questions related to a business account. You can email us. There's phone numbers there as well. You can also just email me and I will get your question to the right place. If you do have a tax accounts with us, I believe there are other ways to contact us through your My VTax account, which is our electronic filing system. So you could get in touch with the department in the other ways as well. But I think the easiest way is probably just to email or call. If you go on our website, there's a series of different email inboxes, and that'll help us get your question to the right place.
I'm going to go back to one more question we got from Lucas. It sounds like sort of a similar question, what we've talked about as far as those manufacturing sales tax exemptions. So in this situation, this is an outdoor cultivator, but they also purchase packaging, and they're arguing that they do some manufacturing to sort of, in addition to grow their product, to package it. So I know you'd mentioned before, maybe folks speak with an accountant about these certain things, but anything you'd want to offer on that topic?
Yeah, so your status as a agricultural operator does not mean you cannot also be a manufacturer. It's just that they are defined two different ways. So you could be a farmer and a manufacturer in one business. For example, there's a lot of Vermont businesses just like that. It's a dairy operation, but they manufacture cheese, or they manufacture maple syrup. So there's a lot of Vermont businesses that are growers and are food manufacturers. So there's nothing unusual about that. You can certainly be both. And if you are both, then you're entitled to the agricultural exemptions when they apply. If you buy agricultural machinery that's exempt, that would be exempt. And then if you're using something in your manufacturing operation, there's a test for whether it's the beginning and end of the manufacturing process. Everything in that, between that beginning and end bookends, is exempt, whether it's raw material, machinery and equipment, quality control, packaging. That's all under the manufacturing exemption, but you can certainly be both things. And so we have a lot of information on our website about all these exemptions. So you can take a look at that, and you can email me if you have any questions. They can be tricky for any business, and just because you're a manufacturer does not mean everything you buy is exempt from sales tax. If you buy a computer for your front office, or stuff that your sales team needs, or your products for around the office, for the kitchen and the restrooms, obviously that stuff is not in the manufacturing process. It's not exempt from sales tax. So there are rules and tests for when things are exempt and when things are taxable for a manufacturer. But whether you're in the cannabis business or not, the rules for manufacturing is the same.
Yeah, and just to get to sort of Cheryl's question in the chat, which is, I think we're talking about two different definitions of manufacturing. So one is we license businesses here at the CCB as cannabis manufacturers. So what Will is talking about is what the tax department considers a definition of manufacturing, which I think, based on what he's saying, businesses here might want to go to the tax department website and really read up on what those manufacturing definitions are, because what we license someone as cannabis manufacturing, that is a separate thing. So I just wanted to point out, I think we're talking about two different definitions here.
Yeah, that is helpful, and there may be slight differences. I suspect that if you are a manufacturer under the CCB rules, you're probably a manufacturer under the sales tax rules. Really, it just requires that you take raw materials in an integrated series of steps to create a new product for sale. That's the definition. So it's as far as who is a manufacturer, the sales tax rules are pretty broad. So I'm guessing that the overlap might be pretty exact on that. But I don't know for sure.
Sorry, was there a question in there? I heard some speaking, but I'm not sure. I guess not. All right. One last chance for folks to raise their hand, ask a question. Got one more from my end here. And thanks again, Will, for your time. And thanks for everyone for taking the time to join. By the way, if anyone works with someone that might want to watch this later, the recording will be up on the CCB YouTube page. One more question I wanted to throw out there, but what about instances where someone is on a payment plan for tax liability and they might fall behind? How long does it take for their tax status to be changed, or either way? So if they basically, what's the timeline for, you know, if they fall behind on payments, how quickly can they get their tax status changed?
Yeah, it depends on the circumstances. Most of the situations we see is someone gets a little behind. They catch up on their filings, so they've filed everything that needs to be filed, but there's some tax liability left unpaid. And so that's a sum, and we ask for a payment plan to cover that old liability. And I think all or nearly all of our payment plans are monthly. So we program it into our system, and as long as the computer system sees a payment every 30 days, then you're in good standing. So if someone stops making their payments, I don't know exactly. I suspect it's probably 15 or 30 days after they've failed to make a required payment. It might pop up for our compliance division, and we would probably email or call the person and remind them that the payment is due, maybe send them a letter. And so, as long as they make up those payments, it's not like an instantaneous good standing, bad standing. But I think the point is that I believe that your licensees have to certify to the CCB periodically that they're in good standing. So when they do that, they need to have all their payments in, or else they are not in good standing. Do we immediately notify the CCB a day after one missed payment? No, there's a period of time in there that we work with taxpayers, try to get them back on track. I don't know exactly what it is. I suspect that some businesses are probably monitored more closely than others, like really, really problematic accounts that have a very large delinquency. We probably follow very closely. And if there's just a little bit of liability left or the person is paying it off, you're probably not going to get a call from the department immediately after missing a payment.
Okay, thank you. Any last thoughts? All right, I want to thank Will for taking the time to explain this pretty tricky subject, but this was very informative. Thanks for everyone else for joining, and we'll catch you next time. Have a great day.
Thank you.